Hello, welcome to today's Back to the City. I'm very excited today because I'm joined by my good friend Venus DeMars. Welcome, Venus. And we're going to dive into I Think the Darkness,
Yes.
the wonderful new record. There's a theme of transformation, which is introduced in the opening title track, I Think the Darkness, which ends. How do we change? Ask the question, how do we change? This break of misbelief, transformation, can you hear, can you hear? And I'm excited to see how this focus on transformation and change relates to thinking the darkness and to go on that journey. But before we get too kind of focused on the concepts, let's begin with two things. First of all, flagging up what you have on the horizon is on the 26th and the 27th of August, Friday and Saturday,
Yep.
a show at Palmer's and then in Duluth.
Palmer's is Friday, and then Duluth is at the Earth Rider. So Duluth Superior, I believe that's in Superior. And then the opening act for Palmer's, which is Stardust Collective, is based in Duluth. And they're coming down for us, to open for us, and they're also the ones that put together the show at Earth Rider. So we're going to follow them back up there, and then they invited us to headline up there as well. So
Yeah.
we're gonna do that the day right after. So kind of a mini, tiny tour of the two big cities in Minnesota, both outdoor gigs.
Yeah. Stardust makes me think of Ziggy and Bowie, and there is, of course, the Bowie cover, Hello Space Boy, on here, which obviously is very coherent with the space theme.
Yeah.
There is the moon is very prominent on the artwork. I love this inlay just here as well. Of course, we have the band members. Let's give a shout out to each of the band members.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, there's me on the left. Danny May is the one lounging. T-Rev is my drummer. So Danny May, my bass player, T-Rev, my drummer. And then Susanna Sweet is my second guitarist over on the right, kind of looking off in the distance.
Yeah.
We're all bored out of our skulls, and we're waiting for the transport to whatever literary and science fiction place we're going to endeavor to tour next. So we have that. It's full of Easter eggs.
Yes.
I don't understand them all even, but the whole band is a collective. We all brainstormed on it, so we all understand the references. Gamers or sci-fi freaks or you know, whatever, they're gonna figure it out.
We have Persephone, for example, Osiris, Genesis there too. So what is the significance of this scene here? Like waiting for the departures, there are the various different literary or gaming references. How do these, so just focusing on the visuals before we delve into the particular songs and the lyrics and the concepts. Visually, what is the significance in for the record of this scene and of the idea of there being these various possible locations? Yeah,
well, it's all the possibilities, a multiverse of different things that we could possibly find ourselves in the future, and it's kind of at a crossroads. I mean, we have gone through an incredible metamorphosis over the last 3 years. COVID, Trump, the murder of George Floyd, just amazing. And Minneapolis, I mean, because of the uprising that happened after the murder, based right here in Minneapolis, and our house we live just a few blocks away from there. So it really hit me home for all of these things happening, and what do we do now? How do we move forward? How do we rebuild our life, our world, our existence? So it's kind of, once we came up with, I wrote the title track, I Think the Darkness, during lockdown, COVID lockdown, reflecting on the tail end of the Trump era, and just feeling terribly depressed about everything. And that was when I was feeling, how are we going to move forward? And thinking, it was, the lyrics came after, I began it before the murder of George Floyd, and I finished the lyric after. And so it's a reflection on all of these huge events of Reconstruction. And I was trying to figure out how to build the lyric, because it's different. It's an experimental song, which we don't often do. But because we couldn't even rehearse together on those early days, because we didn't have a vaccine, we were meeting on Zoom over everything. Danny May actually joined the band just before COVID hit. I invited her to come in and be my steady bass player. Before that, it was Mercy from Apocalypse Theater, had been very kind and generous to sub bass for me, and kind of was a holding pattern for me for quite a while, until I got somebody who I could permanently have in the band.
Very good addition.
So, although Mercy misses being in the band, but we'll try to get him back for other things when we can. Yeah, Danny May didn't even begin working in the band rehearsal-wise. We had to start meeting on Zoom and keep everything isolated. We couldn't rehearse until the first vaccine took over, so way later on, after we built this song. So what I did is I came up with a song, and we can get into the details of how I did it, but we traded files, and I approached the lyric in a different way by writing a prose piece, not a lyric per se. So it's like a poem, but it's a prose poem, so no rhyming, just a phrasing. And I was recalling growing up as a kid in the 60s in Duluth. And I remembered an incident when I was a kid that I was really distressed because as a family, my parents took us out to go see a movie. That was a big deal, going out, but it was a real stormy night, lots of wind, and people would dress up back then. If you remember the 60s, everybody had hats, it's like a different world back then. A very noir feeling, And my mom had a hat on even, because it was a big deal to go out. And the wind took her hat and blew it off and blew it down the alley, and she lost it. It was just too stormy, too windy. We had to get in for the movie. We couldn't get it. And I was a very sensitive little kid. I would cry a lot if I felt, I was so empathetic for so many things and people, and I would get caught up in their feelings and their worries and their stresses, and I just felt so bad. I couldn't do anything, and that's why I still remember it. As a little kid, I must have been 6 or 7 when that happened, and I just felt so helpless and kind of traumatized in a bizarre little way. But then you think about that, and you think about the kids that are dealing with the incredible traumas that are happening now. What we did in our country with the Native community, tearing families apart, that we're now finally reckoning with, and what wars have done for kids, and all of the things that we are involved in. And my remembering how horrible it was for that little bitty incident to happen. How must kids be damaged from the kind of traumas that are traumatic for adults to go through.
Absolutely.
It was really just kind of an epiphany to me when I was writing this. And then so when I got that done, I couldn't quite figure out how to fit it into the song. And my producer, Barb Morrison, in New York, they suggested that I take my piano piece that I had come up with from a grand piano that I inherited from another friend of mine, Chris Strauss. It's his old piano. Ultimately, it was from North High, but full of stickers, all torn apart. It sounds great, but it's definitely punk rock piano. But it's a big grand piano, and I was feeling so bad, I went there and plunked out just random stuff, and I recorded it. And I loved the little melody I made, so I made a formal recording of it, but it didn't go anywhere.
That's where the piano line emerged
The piano line emerged from that, and Barb suggested I take just a section and loop it, which I did, and suddenly I had a format, consistent, and on that I started talking the lyric, and Lynette suggested I try doing an experiment of just singing the prose, even though I didn't have it in that kind of line. So I just started singing off the top of my head this prose, and it just kind of came out, and I recorded it, and it worked.
Interesting, the juxtaposition of weaving together these like fragmented parts and experiencing form kind of coming from the seeming chaos.
Yeah.
Juxtaposed with this central image, which is what struck me most when first listening to the song, when the wind takes her hat, blows it down the alley.
Yeah.
So there, the image there is of the way in which you were talking about how things were in the 60s. There is this effort to present oneself in this way, like it's well curated.
Yeah, yeah.
And then something happens to break that. And as a kid, you empathize and you see so much, there's been investment and careful curation of this thing, crafting of this image, and then that has been destroyed in a way that you can feel the loss and the fragmentation of that. So how do you feel now, reflecting on that story and on the story of how the song came to be?
Well, I think I see the correlation between the chaos and pulling the chaos together and finding some reason for things as you know, we do try to make sense out of chaos. I think that's kind of human nature.
Yeah. In the Hello Spaceboy, it ends, this chaos is killing me.
Yeah.
And then in the other cover on the record, Heroin, it's ending with Heroin be the death of me.
Yeah.
So there is this strong coherence, I think, where I think the darkness, again, is introducing this theme of transformation, the question of how change happens. We have this instance of uninvited change, which is experienced as loss and as grief and trauma. And then we also have, through the creation of the song, this experience of change and transformation and something emerging. And in both of the covers, they close with the focus on death.
Yeah, the struggle of not wanting to deal with the chaos and finding a refuge through the peacefulness of heroin, opiate, which in a way brings order to chaos, in that it gives you a place to calm and relax and find peace, but that peace will ultimately destroy you. Because you're addicted to it. It's so addictive.
but there is this underlying yearning for connection and
Calm.
connection and
insight.
calm. Yes. Some of the other lyrics in Heroin, which of course is Lou Reed's song.
Yeah.
I will try to nullify my life, and then earlier before the end, that I'm better off than dead.
Yeah.
Is a lyric as well. So there's this this sense of the chaos being just too much to handle. So then there's this level on which we're desiring, yearning for nullification and for something better than death, perhaps, in the experience here.
Yeah, you know, I choose the covers
Yeah.
that I work with, and I don't try to sound like the artist,
Yeah.
because only the artist who created them can sound like the artist. So what I usually try to do is I grab the lyric that speaks to me in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try to find the core meaning of that, and then rebuild the song to echo what the original song is, and then rebuild the song in that way that I feel I can give it the kind of emotion that I'm able to do,
Mm-hmm.
without trying to pretend to be the artist who gave their emotion to the song
Yeah.
in the creation of it and the original performance recording of it.
I'm particularly curious about that process with the song Heroin, because last time you were on Back to the City, you came in and did an in-studio
Yeah.
acoustic performance, and
Yes.
Heroin was one of the songs that you did.
Yeah.
So was Jackie Ray.
Mhm.
And so witnessing how those songs have, in the meantime, with all the Pretty Horses, emerged into these forms.
Yes.
Could you expand a bit on what you were saying about how the process of how you work with covers, specifically with Heroin, and like getting from the point of like you've got the acoustic version and kind of owning it, and then so what was the journey like from there to here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting to try to figure this out and talk, because I just do it and I don't think about it.
Yeah.
So songwriting sometimes for me just comes together really fast, but often it just drags, and it takes a long time for me to craft and come to the final recording of a song. And I can never predict what's going to happen. For Heroin, the cover, I was just thrilled with. Velvet Underground was one of the early records that I bought when I was first independent. Had my own apartment and was trying to be an adult, and buying records was one of the ways of doing that, you know. And I just found Velvet Underground so amazing. And the DIY quality of it spoke to me, because everything was so top 40 back then. It just seemed impossible to do anything musically on any kind of professional level until punk broke. And then before that, the inspiration of hearing the Velvet Underground being that art rock type of thing.
Yeah.
And the rule breaking that they had. So the lyric always attracted me on that song, just because it was dark and, you know, it was cool and blah, blah, blah. But I was invited to be part of a literary event for a book release a number of years ago at Moon Palace, and the author really loved that song.
Mm.
And
What was the book?
oh boy, I don't have all of my things in front of me, so now I'm going to have to go back and research and do that, because this has been a number of years. But the organizer for that, Rain Taxi, was organizing it. And they invited me to be the person to come in and try to come up with a cover of Heroin. And so I thought, yeah, I always liked that song. And then I listened to it, and it's so, I mean, there's 2 chords, and it doesn't change. The only thing that changes is the intensity. So now I'm getting into the weeds a little bit from the beginning of all of this, not quite answering your question, but I will. Let me quickly recap or quickly try to cut to the chase on this. So what I did for that is I had to deconstruct the whole thing. And I added another chord. So I made it a 3-chord thing. I changed the time to 3/4, which is kind of a nice, it's kind of a nice way, feel, rhythm for me. So I changed it to that signature. And then from there, I began to play with how to weave in a new melody line to match with a 3-chord format, still keeping the flavor and the darkness of the lyric and the delivery. And then I played with the intensity. And we had the idea while we were recording it to actually slowly ramp up the speed and then drop it back down, and then slowly ramp up the speed more and drop it back down. So it starts very slow, but slowly increases up to a crescendo of speed, which was a challenge for Trevor to listen to the click track and follow that.
Was the click track speeding up?
Yes. Yeah, so the click track slowly ramped up and then dropped down, slowed again. Slowly ramped up even more and dropped down. And by the 3rd verse, we're really flying on that. But you don't notice it in the song. It just brings that intensity.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I had to struggle with, and we had some back and forth between Barb, who is the producer of this album, for those songs. I produced the title track and the final track of the album. Those were later recordings, but I had to choose to either keep the drums kind of loose and live, or try to get them to tighten up real tight, like you would for a formal recording. And I struggled with that, going back and forth on that, and I tightened a lot of it, but for that particular song, I really couldn't, because of the variable time signature. So I decided to just leave the drums be a little more live sounding as I mixed it and chose that. And that was a little different than Barb would have approached it, but I feel it brings some energy and edginess to the album.
Yeah.
So now I went way off track, and I got to talk about how to get from
the acoustic version.
acoustic. So when I write a song, I'll sit with it and play with it on an acoustic version for quite a while.
With any song?
Well, a lot of them.
Okay.
And because sometimes songs take forever, I work out and get the delivery, and I got a show, so I try it out, and it seems to work in an acoustic format. So I kind of get a good handle of the song that way. And then when it comes to really formally trying to make it a recording, then of course I want to bring the full band in for that, and make a full band recording. And that's where we start digging in and bringing in the other instrumentation and trying to figure out how this is going to work, how that's going to work, how the drums are going to play, how the bass is going to weave in, how the 2 guitars, and then whatever other background treatment we might bring in order to just flesh it out a little bit. And that process is the process that we work with in the recording studio. A lot of trial and error, and a lot of just takes, and working and playing until it's like, yeah, that's the one, go with that, and let's try that, and really, and we'll push through that. Barb and I would be doing that for this recording anyway, for those songs.
At what stage did the decision to have the click track speed up come about?
That happened in the recording, and that was Barb and my trying to untangle that, and I believe Barb is the one who came up with the idea of doing that.
sense
and
of
then,
being carried away
yeah,
is very appropriate, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So then we had to struggle because I'm not, I didn't have an engineer. I was acting as the engineer and the artist, which Barb was not happy about. But they were very forgiving and patient with me as I tried to figure out how to get this all to work, and I did eventually, and we got it to function and
Yes.
And managed. So yeah, so that happened on the ground as we were recording, and usually when I record, I start with the drums to get that down. Everything else is scratch track. Even my guitar and my vocals are scratch, but we concentrate on the drums to get the drums to sound real good. Once we have the drums really well done, then we'll come back and start bringing in the other instrumentations. Often my lyric is the last thing to go down, because then I've got the full emotion of the final,
Yes.
semblance of the music. And then, of course, it's a whole process of mixing and treating and maybe bringing in those little other extra elements that would be aside from what we would do as a live version.
It seems fitting to focus on Hello Spaceboy now, because we've just been talking about your process of working with the covers. Could you talk through the process that you went through with Hello Spaceboy?
Hello Spaceboy, yes. So that one I kept a little closer to the original.
Yes. That is quite it is a lot.
Yeah, so that was a little bit of a different approach to it. Lyrically, I had to play with my time signature, not the time signature, but the key, because my key range is different than Bowie's. I have to usually drop it all lower, but I can't just I have to do it like in half steps, because I have to get the high register as well as the low register. And Hello Spaceboy is at the peak of my high. I really have to push to get it way up there. And as we've been rehearsing it live now to come up with our live version, I am struggling. So we have that up early on the set so I can get it over with quick and not have my vocal cords all blown away before I even tackle it. But when we were recording it, I had been rehearsed and I had a lot of elasticity in my vocal cords, so it was a little easier with that because I was working on it so much. And it was a quieter environment. So we did, the flavor of that was to get the drums, to work that in, and then the guitar chords. I chose Hello Spaceboy kind of for the imagery of it, the space imagery, because that recalled the 1960s, which I was all about, weren't we all back then, those of us who were alive when the Apollo missions started. The fascination of going up to space and going and landing on the moon. Amazing time to be alive and witness and wonder the possibilities of humanity.
Yeah.
The impossibilities of humanity tackling. All of those things that just never seemed even plausible. So Hello Spaceboy, of course, recollects Space Oddity. It reflects on that.
Yes.
So Bowie himself is looking back on his own writing and making a commentary on that, as well as social commentary.
Absolutely. Yes.
So he's got a little cycle of reflection going on there.
Yeah, in a different way than we have in, let's say, Ashes to Ashes. We have, Major Tom.
Yeah.
He's a junkie.
But he keeps returning to that song because that was so pinnacle in his career, I think, and also, I think touched a chord in all of us for that strangeness of breaking free of what we felt our limitations were.
Yeah.